Ladies and gentlemen, this was a presentation on your dial at 1250 kilocycles. WHBI, Hoyt Brothers Incorporated, Newark, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, we present at this time the regular Sunday afternoon address of Father Charles E. Coughlin from Royal Oak, Michigan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This Sunday, like every Sunday during these holiday months, finds the Shrine of the Little Flower crowded to capacity. Today was Cleveland and Akron Day at Royal Oak. With the other unannounced visitors, some 20,000 pilgrims in all have made this a memorable day. Father Coughlin officiated at 2 of the solemn masses, participated in the benediction services, and he has already preached 3 sermons and is about to begin his broadcast. Next Sunday, August 13th, is Toledo Day at Royal Oak. The citizens of Northern Ohio have chosen this Sunday as their dedication day at the Shrine of the Little Flower. From the cities of Toledo, Troy, Columbus, and other places will come a vast number of loyal and faithful friends of Father Coughlin. They will assist at solemn services which begin promptly at 10:30 in the morning, and then return for a special service in the afternoon at 2:30 o'clock. Father Coughlin will officiate at both of these services. From the various cities of the nation have come reports that Sunday, September 2nd, will be a national day at the Shrine of the Little Flower. Over the Labor Day weekend, thousands of pilgrims will visit the shrine. However, Sunday, September 2nd, will find the Shrine of the Little Flower host to innumerable faithful and loyal supporters of social justice. Plans have already been made in cities reaching from New York to St. Louis, from Minneapolis to New Orleans, in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Chicago, to send large groups of patriotic Americans and loyal supporters of Father Coughlin to the Shrine of the Little Flower on that day. Father Coughlin has arranged a beautiful liturgical program for all the visitors. Plan now to spend your Labor Day holiday here at Royal Oak. Despite his evident fatigue, Father Coughlin is now seated before the microphone, ready to deliver the most important address of the day. An address filled with facts and figures. An address that will set forth the farm story in America in such bold relief that little room for further contradiction will remain. Ladies and gentlemen, you will not be able to remember this litany of facts and figures, and yet you will not be informed or prepared to discuss this question unless you have these facts at your fingertips. Therefore, please, for the sake of your friends and families, write to Father Coughlin this week and get this most important information to reread for them and to discuss with them. The address which Father Coughlin has prepared contains the most imposing assembly of governmental facts and figures in relation to farm problems. A problem that must be solved before the working men in the cities will share in the prosperity that should be ours. By the way, are you aware of the fact that last week the American Federation of Labor committed itself definitely to a living annual wage policy for the automobile workers? Naturally, those who have followed Father Coughlin and who have supported his theories of social justice applaud the American Federation of Labor for this progressive move. Social Justice magazine will detail this story in next week's issue. And now I present to you Father Coughlin.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, those of you who possess a copy of the Congressional Record dated July 28, 1939, are indeed very fortunate. It not only contains most valuable statistics, but also presents a picture of the sad plight to which our nation has been reduced. I am not a pessimist, nor am I given to foolish optimism. But I dare repeat what I have contended for many years, namely that the debt situation in America is altogether out of hand. Any fair-minded person, even those who are in the creditor class, will admit that we can operate no longer on the financial system which has characterized the period during which our farmers and laborers were reduced from self-sustaining, independent, prosperous persons to their present miserable status. No longer can we afford to temporize with the unbearable burden of debt. If we attempt to do so, not one of us will escape the repercussions which are inevitable. For the financial system on which we have operated not only has decayed, it is now an actual menace with its crumbling walls to all our free institutions. The congressional record to which I refer contains information and tables of government figures which indirectly and directly bear out this assertion. The daily papers, of course, refrain from reproducing these statistics, possibly because the publishers were of the opinion that such reading would be considered too dry and too uninteresting. Nevertheless, risking the presentation of an interesting broadcast, I am of the opinion that it is advisable to present to you some of the facts contributed during this past session of Congress. And from these facts, if you and I have courage to meet them as a nation, it will be evident that a drastic change in our method of finance must be accepted, that a drastic change in our attitude towards the farmers of America must be devised. Otherwise, these unfortunate farmers, without whom America cannot subsist, and upon whom industry, commerce, and the entire nation depend, they will be liquidated just as surely as Joseph Stalin liquidated the kulaks of Russia. Time will not allow me to reproduce all the remarks and all the speeches delivered on the floor of the Senate referring to this question. However, at the risk of boring you, permit me to read from the speech delivered upon the floor by the Honorable Henrik Shipstead of Minnesota. The history of farm mortgages, said he, has to a large extent been the history of bailing out the commercial banks. The record will show that during the World War, the farmers of the United States borrowed on their notes and collateral something like $3.5 billion. When the crash of 1920 came, the banks had to have their money. And as a result, the farmers were induced to borrow money on mortgages on their farms in order to pay the banks, so that the banks could obtain their money. However, the farmers still carried the loans which they had been encouraged to incur during the war to increase production. The War Finance Corporation was created to make loans, therefore, to farmers in order that the farmers could pay the banks, but still owe the War Finance Corporation. Later, the Farm Mortgage Corporation was created to unload chattel mortgages upon a federal instrumentality in order that the commercial banks of the country might be able to obtain their money, which the farmer previously had borrowed. And so we find the history of this legislation, which is said to have been for the benefit of the farmer. We find that it shows that it has been for the purpose of bailing out the commercial banks. So far as improving the condition of agriculture and of farmers is concerned, I point out the fact that in the past 10 years, 30% of the farmers, or 1 out of every 3, have been sold out under foreclosure. The idea is quite generally held that we are making good progress in solving our economic problems, particularly those of the farmer. It would be ridiculous to contend that some improvement had not been apparent in the past year or two as compared with 1931 and 32. Oh, but what we're likely to forget is that such a comparison only contrasts faltering hope with black despair. There are those who would have us believe that the farm problem is rapidly moving to a solution. Here again we are dealing with a situation in which we are asked to compare a little of something with a great deal of nothing. Despite the fact that the federal government increased its payment in agricultural subsidies and benefit payments by 34% in 1938 over 1937, the American farmer had 11% less income in 1938 than he had in 1937. Much has been made of the fact that the farm mortgage indebtedness has been reduced by $2.4 billion. But how was it reduced, I ask? It has been reduced by foreclosing on farm mortgages, driving farmers out of their homes. When a farm mortgage is foreclosed and the farmer is taken away from the land, oh yes, the debt is wiped out. But that is how farm mortgage indebtedness has been reduced under this regime. In its 1948 report, the Farm Credit Administration discloses, quotations, the total farm mortgage debt dropped approximately $2.4 billion in the 10 years ending January 1st, 1938. And it dropped due to foreclosures, to less borrowing by farmers, and to refinancing after scale down of indebtedness had been made. As a matter of fact, continues this official government report, the scaling down of the indebtedness has been about $210 million, which is about only 2% of the entire farm debt of the country. And Mr. Norman J. Wall, the senior agricultural economist for the United States Department of Agriculture, in a publication prepared for the department last September, entitled A Graphic Summary of Agricultural Credit, Mr. Wall accounts for the sharp reduction in the farm debt largely in terms of mortgage foreclosures. Says Mr. Wall, quotation, from January 1st, 1930 to January 1st, 1935, the mortgage indebtedness of farmers decreased sharply from $9,214,278,000 to $7,645,091,000. This reduction of 17% during this period resulted largely, said he, from foreclosures and other requirements of mortgage properties by mortgagees. In another report, Mr. Wall also says the following, namely, the chief factor accounting for the decrease in total farm mortgage indebtedness has been the liquidation of debt through foreclosures or assignment of title to the mortgage holder. My friend, the 17% reduction in the debt which we hear so much about was accomplished by assignment of properties without foreclosure and the foreclosure by the Federal Land Bank and other lenders foreclosing upon farm mortgages. Let us look at some ancient history, starting with 1910, when the total farm mortgage debt was $3.3 billion. At that time, it amounted to less than 10% of the $36 billion at which all farmlands and buildings in the United States were valued. The peak of the farm mortgage debt load was reached in 1928, when it was $9,468 million, or 20% of the value of all the farmlands and buildings in our country. In 1933, when land property values were at their depression low, the debt represented about 28% of the value of land and buildings. So, despite the sharp cut of $2,400 million in the farm mortgage debt following 1928, which brought it down to about $7 billion level at the end of 38, this smaller debt still represented 20% of the value of all farmlands and buildings. The total farm mortgage debt today is about what it was in 1920. In 1937, it was $7,254 million, and in 1920, it was $7,800 million. But in 1920, land and buildings were valued at $68 billion, and the mortgage debt represented only 12%. There's a great deal of difference between conditions in 1920 and 1937. By 1937, the value of all farmlands and buildings was cut almost in half. And they were then valued at $35 billion. Oh, but the mortgage debt, instead of being 12% of the value of the land buildings, was now in 37, 22%. So, in terms of underlying values, the smaller debt of 37 is twice as hard to carry as the one in 1920. In terms of the farmer's income, the difficulties which confront him when 1920 is compared to 1938 or 37 are shown to be even more serious today. In 1920, the farmer's gross income was $13,500 million. In 1938, it was $8,882 million. And of this sum, mind you, $482 million were government benefit payments to the farmers. The exchange value of the farmer's produce, moreover, is not as favorable today as it was in 1920. I desire to call attention to another situation. We have subsidized by government appropriations the payment of farm mortgages and federal land bank notes to about $140 million in the last 4 years. And still during these 4 years, 65,000 farms in the United States have been sold out by the federal land banks on foreclosure. So far as the farm mortgage and farm situation is concerned, we are approaching a period when we will be sitting on the top of a volcano that will explode with devastating effects. But to return to the subject of the reduction of the farm debt, there are some who point out to it as an accomplishment. Well, let's see. Since 1934, some 110 farms out of every 1,000 farms have been sold at forced sale. In other words, one farmer in every 10 has been dispossessed. In the 7-year period before that, taking us back to 1926, some 200 in every 1,000 farmers were dispossessed by forced sale. So over a period of a decade, almost 1/3 of each 1,000 farms in the nation has changed hands through forced sale. It is in this manner that the farm mortgage debt of the country has been cut down. There's the truth of it. Another result of these foreclosures is that the 5 principal lending agencies of the country held land valued at $1 billion at the end of 1938. This represents about 125,000 farms, or 28 million acres of farmland. It's about equal to the entire farming area, for example, of the state of Minnesota. Now, what has been the effect of this policy? Since 1920, the percentage of farms operated by tenants, non-owners, has risen from 37 to 42%. And the farmers now constitute only 25% of the total population instead of the 30% represented in 1920. These figures can only suggest the human tragedy that lies behind the farmers of America. Lost homes and savings, poverty and pauperization, relief and nomadism. These have been the only answer that we have apparently been able to give to the most serious economic problem we have ever faced as a people. More rapidly than almost any other country in the world, we are actually creating a landless class. 64% of the present total farm mortgage debt is on farms that are owner-operated. Obviously, if we are to save owner-operation of farms, we will have to meet the mortgage problem on the farm face to face. Let us examine in a little more detail the changes that have taken place in the distribution of the farm debt by lenders, and more particularly, the activities of the 2 federal farm loan agencies, the Federal Land Bank and the Land Bank Commission. In 1930, 12 9/10% of the total farm mortgages were held by federal lending agencies. Today, about 40% of the total farm mortgage debt is so held. Most of this increase, mind you, has come since 1933. And with the table, which I will print for all those who request a copy of this discourse, you will see from official figures that this predicament has grown worse in the past several years. In 11 states, these 2 federal agencies now hold more than 50% of the farm mortgage debt, and in 40 states, they hold 20% or more. At the end of 1938, the federal land banks and the land bank commissioners had $2,735,074,803 in loans outstanding. Who owns United States? That figure almost suggests that question. Since May the 1st, 1933, the 2 federal farm lending agencies have made loans totaling more than $2.5 billion. What was this money used for? Almost all of it, my friend. 87.8% of it, in fact, went to refund outstanding debts. Taking the period from May 1st, 1933 to January 1st, 1937, the latest for which percentage figures are available, we learn that 70.8% of the proceeds of federal land bank and commissioner loans were used to refinance previously existing farm mortgage indebtedness. In other words, the farmers were loaned money not to help the farmers, but to help the original lenders, the banks. An additional 17% was used to refinance indebtedness, other than mortgage obligations, that farmers owed to commercial banks, private individuals, and to taxing agents. Only 4.9% of that tremendous amount of money went for the purchase of land and for the actual redemption from foreclosure. And not more than 3.3% was used for buildings and improvements on the farm, and these are governmental figures. It cannot be said that the farmer was borrowing money for any expansion. As a matter of fact, the farmer was borrowing money with which to pay his previous creditors to relieve the banks and the lending agencies that had loaned money to the farmers on a constantly decreasing farm income. The banks knew that the farmers' income now was not able to sustain the loans. Therefore, the banks had the government lend farmers money so the farmers could pay the banks. I wonder if the farmers will ever be able to repay the government with their decreasing income. Well, once more the farmer was refinancing and recomposing his debts, converting short-term into long-term loans. That is a process with which every farmer has become familiar. During the period of the war, and immediately after the farmer heavily increased his short-term borrowing at his local bank, he was told that he must feed the world. And so he did. He was told it was his patriotic duty to produce more food for Europe as well as for America. And so he did. But the farmer didn't have the cash, so he borrowed it from the bank. By 1918, he owed the local bankers $2.5 billion on his open or collateral note. This was $400 million more than he had owed the bankers in 1914. By 1920, these short-term loans reached the peak of $3.869 billion that the farmers owed the bank. By 1931, this figure had been cut in half, and in 1934, the farmers' notes at local banks totaled $807,613,000. All this short-term debt was in addition to the farmers' mortgage debt. In addition, I say. Well, what reduced the short-term loans of the farmers during this period? And how were they reduced? Not by payment out of production, because there was no more production for Europe. They were reduced by borrowing on their farms, in other words, by increasing their farm mortgages. When the banks began to call for a payment of farm loans in 1920, you know that the Depression began way back then. Farm purchasing power was drastically curtailed by the forced collection. Farmers who had any credit were encouraged to slap a new mortgage on their farm and take up some more short-term paper. Those who could not supply the cash, well, they were foreclosed. Country banks with frozen assets began to close in the farm areas, and loans were canceled. Well, for the most part, the evil day was postponed by refinancing, as we call it. Let's see what happened. From 1920 to 1931, the short-term farm credit held by commercial banks decreased by $1,932,531,000. From 1920 to 1930, the farm mortgage debt rose by $1,433,531,000. $383,690,000. During the period from 1920 to 1927, when most of this earlier rewriting of debts was being done, the farm mortgage holdings of insurance companies and federal and joint stock land banks increased at the rate of $377 million annually for all three of them combined. And from 1920 to 1928, these three federal agencies increased the amount of their loans by $2,622 million. This increase was $1 billion greater than the actual increase in the total farm mortgage debt. Commercial banks and private lenders were moving out of the agricultural lending business. The short-term debt incurred by the farmer to win the war was being written into a long-term debt by new government agencies and old ones that were expanding because of funds dumped into their hands through war profits that could not find an outlet. Who owns the farms? Are you beginning to see? Well, obviously, this change for the farmer from one lender to another after the war, and again in the 30s, did not solve his debt problem. The debt problem remained the same. The only thing the farmer traded was a new borrower. He did not have a chance to liquidate his debt. He only had a chance to have a new kind of lending agent. So, the lenders were bailed out. The bankers were saved. But the farmer was left with his debt. He was left to carry the burden when the price of wheat and every other commodity that he raised was cut more than half. In the 30s, banks were going broke all over this country. The federal refinancing of farm mortgages helped the banking situation. Insurance companies were heavy lenders on farm real estate, but they were getting land instead of income, and their contracts to policyholders were seriously threatened. They too were bailed out, but the farmers still carried the load, a load which is twice as great today as it was in the 20s. A load which has put on them, in the name of helping them, a greater burden. As a matter of fact, my friends, the result of all this wicked refinancing, intended to help the farmer, really helped the lender to get his cash and to leave the burden of debt on the poor, unfortunate farmers of America. Mortgage companies and private individuals were also bailed out with government bonds, and their losses were slight. This rescue work was undoubtedly necessary, but let no one tell you that it saved the farmer. It did not save the American farmer, and a continuation of this policy in the future will not save him. It will ruin him. If the farmer has not already lost his farm, he still has the same debt to pay back. True, he's getting a little longer-term mortgage and slightly lower interest rate. But the point is, my friends, the farmer's income has been falling still lower, and he's no better off. He's worse off. In 1920, when the farm mortgage debt was $7,800,000,000, And the farmer's gross income was $13,500 million. The farmer was paying out 3.5% of that income to meet an annual interest bill of $479 million. Now, in 1938 of the New Deal year, with a total mortgage debt of $7 billion, the farmer was paying out 4.1% of his $8.8 billion income to meet an interest burden of $365 million. It should not be overlooked that in 1938, about $37 million was paid out of the United States Treasury to subsidize a lower interest rate. Since 1938, or 33 rather, a total of $137 million has been paid out of the Treasury to maintain a 3.5% interest on federal-held farm mortgages. But still, the point is that with that subsidy of $137 million from the Treasury to reduce interest rates to the farmer, farm foreclosure sales are going on at a faster pace today than ever before. And I ask you, would you consider yourself fortunate if you had a $10 bill and had to pay 10 cents on it, or a $1 bill and had to pay 7 cents on it? That's the condition of the farmer today. But to return to the distribution that was made of the money loaned by the two federal lending agencies. Who got this money, I ask? Here's the answer. Over $876 million went to refinance debts held largely by private lenders against farmers. This represents 41.33% of the total amount of this refinancing during the period covered. Commercial banks received $479,500,000 of it, or 22.5% of the money loaned by these federal agencies. Life insurance companies got $305,800,000, or 1.4% of the money loaned to the farmers. The joint stock land banks received $142,500,000, or 6.7% of the money loaned to the farmers. $84 million of the loans went to buy stock in local loan associations and to pay bank and loan fees. Why? Out of a total of $2.123 billion supposedly loaned to the farmers in this period, only $172 million of it went for the purchase of land and the redemption of farms from foreclosures or for general improvement. That's the real story. The great bulk of that money went to the banks and merely passed through the farmer's hands. From 1933 to 1938, federal land banks and the Land Bank Commissioners received approximately 1,275,000 applications for loans on a total of $5,775 million. During this period, 857,000 loans were made for a total of $2.5 billion by these agencies. But over $3 billion in applications were rejected. Out of the $2.5 billion in loans closed, it is estimated that over the period from 1933 to 38, scale downs have been effected totaling $211 million. My friends, this represents a cut of about 8% of the total involved. And this sort of reducing comes in the class of those blessings, those New Deal blessings that are little better than nothing. Now, these are absolutely accurate governmental statistics that I am giving you. You can't remember them. You must reread them. But they are the most startling composite of figures that tell the stark story of the mistreatment that the farmers have received under this administration during the past 6 years. From these figures alone, it is obvious that farmers who were refinanced by these government agencies are still saddled with about the same debt they've always had. Distributed among the 857,000 loans closed since 1932 by these agencies, government agencies, the average scale down per farmer amounts to $246. So far as the farmer is concerned, the chief benefit he's received in this process has been an exchange in loans. But nothing virtually has been done to enable the farmer to get a better income with which to meet the loans. On the contrary, the farmer's income has been reduced. What has been the experience of the government and the farmer with cooperative and public lending since the beginning, and more particularly in the last 6 years? Since 1924, the federal land bank system has foreclosed 95,997 farms, representing an investment of $380 million. The Farm Mortgage Corporation, which makes land bank commissioner loans, has, since its creation in 1933, foreclosed. This is New Deal foreclosure. Foreclosed 13,946 farms, representing an investment of $34,291,000. Between these two federal agencies, 110,000 farms have been foreclosed with a total investment of $414,700,000. 60,000 of these foreclosures have been made since 1934. Those are government facts that can't be contradicted. Over this period from 1924 to 38, the federal land banks have sold 82,500 whole or part farms, in which these banks had an investment of $282,655,000 and sold them for $221 million. This means an aggregate loss of 23%. In the past 3 years, the losses have been running higher. In 1936, they were 25.2%. In 1937, 23.4%. And in 1938, the government took a loss of 27.6%. And although selling the farms at these tremendous losses, although taking a farm away from John Smith and selling it to Dick Roach for 27% less and thinking it has done something fine, the federal land banks still have a surplus of profit in the Treasury because of the exorbitant interest rates they've charged the farmers and have gone through the process of taking out a man who spent his life on the farm, making him a nomad, and leaving someone else go in to take it at a bargain. You see, my friends, when the government instrumentality started lending to farmers, it was for the purpose of paying the farmers' creditors. When the creditors had been paid, and the money had been furnished by the federal government to pay the creditors, the farms were foreclosed, causing a loss to the Farm Mortgage Corporation of 38% of its investment. Oh, but the farmers got no benefit out of this. I know. I have all the figures before me. God help the American farmer. None have suffered even proportionately as much as have they. And we who dwell in the city have no substantial idea of the economic servitude to which the American farmer has been reduced during these past 6 years. 6 years spent bailing out the bankers. 6 years spent rewriting fictitious loans for the farmer. Oh, the lender got his money always. And the instrumentality created by the federal government and furnished money by the federal government took a loss, and you city taxpayers, you suffered the loss so that the original bank lenders would get theirs. What are the fundamental aspects of a farm mortgage problem? There are two. The amount of the debt now being borne by the farmer and the income he's able to earn out of his crops. Now, the opportunity for the farmer to earn an income that will enable him to maintain a decent standard of living after clearing the overhead charges he must meet, among which the farm mortgage and its burden are absolutely inescapable, is a minimum essential. As a matter of fact, my friend, after all these years of paying benefit payments to the farmers, we haven't been paying them to the farmers. We have been supposedly paying them to the farmers, but in reality, we have been using the poor farmer to pay these benefits to the commercial bankers. And here are the governmental facts and figures to prove that statement. As a matter of fact, all these years of paying benefit payments to the farmers, what's happening to them? The farmers are still being driven to the wall. They're still being made a landless class, still made into paupers to go into the city, to go on relief, to increase the tax burdens of the great population of taxpayers. And the benefit payments so far have merely prolonged the agony of driving all the farmers of America into pauperdom. The system has the same effect on the farmer, I might say, as cutting the tail of a dog. If you cut it an inch at a time, it takes a little longer, but if you persist in cutting so much every fiscal year, finally the poor dog will be without a tail, and finally the poor farmer will be without a farm, and who will own it? If this is going to continue to be the policy of the federal government, a policy that now, after 6 years, we clearly see and clearly understand, if this is going to be the policy to conduct our future economics, as to make all farmers propertyless and landless and paupers, let's do it at once so that the farmer shall not have the continuous agony of failing to be able to sleep at night because he can hear the roar of the mortgage hounds at his front gate waiting to seize him and destroy him. And with him, the nation. From 1924 to 1929, the farm debt stood at a figure above $9 billion. During that period, farm cash income was relatively stable. It averaged slightly over $11 billion. Farm real estate values were fairly stable. But still, mortgages were being foreclosed at the rate of 20 out of every 1,000. Now, despite the relatively high level of farm income, the rate of mortgage foreclosures was high. That's back in 1924 to 29. And the drop in cash income was followed by a correspondingly sharp increase in the rate of foreclosures, rising to as high as 55 per thousand. That's in 1932. And besides that, farm income was at the $6 billion level, not 11 as it had been. Real estate values also fell consistently since 1924-29. There were only 60% of the 1924-29 index figures in 33. And real estate values have risen only 10 points from the low of this present New Deal period. Cash farm income today was only 75% of the 24-29 level. And so you see the farmer is gradually getting himself in a worse position because he has been victimized by so-called loans to farmers that in reality were loans to commercial banks and other agencies. It does not take a profit on the basis of the experience shown in the two periods of 1924-29 and 1930 and 36 to tell what will happen in the years immediately ahead unless there's a change for the better. The downward trend in farm income shown in 1938 predicts its own consequences unless something is done to relate the farm debt burden to the farm income. The farmer is not expected to pay out more than he receives. Farm income in 1938 was $3 billion below what it was in the 1924-29 period. Farm real estate values have been cut $15 billion. The prices the farmer receives for the goods he sells are out of line with the prices he has to pay for the goods he buys. Again, I remind you of these things. The period from 1924 to 29 was not a particularly prosperous one for the farmer. So when one compares the present 1938 with that time of 1929, it should be kept in mind that the boom that came to industry, that was shared only to a slight extent by agriculture, that was no boom for the farmers, because the farmer had been in a depression since 1920. So the farmer stands in this relation for the 1924-29 period. Perhaps some of you think that this farm discussion has little relation to the laboring class, the industrial class in the city. But bear this in mind. There is no prosperity for the laborer, no prosperity for the industrialist, no prosperity for any person or any group of persons in this nation until prosperity comes first for the farmer. As further evidence of the precariousness of the agricultural situation at the present moment, turn to a statement from the Farm Credit Administration showing the number of delinquent loans now extant in 1939. As far as the federal land banks go, 20% of all their loans are delinquent. The Land Bank Commissioner loans are even worse. 28% are delinquent. A consolidated statement of these two agencies would show that 252,000 of their present loans out of 1,076,000 will not be paid. And the question therefore arises, what are we going to do for the farmer? I have so far given some statistics with reference to the history of the lending program of the federal government, which is supposed to be for the benefit of the farmer. The record will show that it is entirely for the benefit of the money changers. How many of you farmers realize how you have been used as cat's paws to aid not America, but the lending agencies that made America bend its knees in the mud of this oppression? The idea that the farmer is foreclosed and made homeless because of economic conditions over which he has no control, and because of the lending policies of the federal government instrumentalities, apparently operated solely for the benefit of the farmer's creditors, that idea has been scuttled. Constantly our farmers, therefore, are going on relief. Constantly taxes are increasing. Constantly farms are being confiscated. Constantly prices for commodities paid to the farmer are at a less than living wage, a less than working wage. And constantly the condition of America is taking on the feverish condition of our farming class. My friends, the facts and figures which were incorporated in the speech are supported absolutely by carefully established government statistics. In fact, I have not time to give you all the facts and all the figures. But this address, together with all the tables and all the facts and figures, will be printed in a special pamphlet which I am preparing and which will be distributed to every person in this audience who desires a copy. From these official tables, you will see that it has been the policy of the administration to save the banks instead of the farmers. You will see that the farmers have been tricked into becoming cat's paws. You will see that the major endeavor of certain governmental policies has been to assist international finance and not international patriotism. Oh, to save the debts instead of the debtors, to save the abuses of capitalism rather than to save America from these abuses, that has been the program. And it is futile for theorists to argue against these facts. Futile for me to conclude. But I shall conclude by reading for you how Almighty God met such a condition of old. Of old, Almighty God contributed his counsel to a people whose plight was far less precarious than that experienced by our modern American farmers. I invite you, therefore, in the book of Leviticus, which Catholics, Protestants, and Jews recognize as the inspired word of God, I invite you to read the following. Thou shalt sanctify the 50th year and shalt proclaim remission to all the inhabitants of the land. For it is the year of Jubilee. Every man shall return to his own possessions, and every one shall go back to his former family. In the year of Jubilee, all shall return to their possessions. When thou shalt sell anything to thy neighbor, or shalt buy of him, thou shalt buy of him according to the number of years of the Jubilee. And in addition to this book of Leviticus, I will also read for you what the prophet Nehemiah says of the farm situation or of any debt situation. It is this. Quoting Almighty God, the prophet Nehemiah says, "And I was exceedingly angry when I heard their cry according to these words. And my heart thought within myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the magistrates and said to them, Do you every one exact usury of your brethren? And I gathered together a great assembly against them, and I said to them, The thing you do is not good. Both I and my brethren and my servants have lent money and corn to many. Let us all agree not to call for that loan again,
let us forgive the debt that is owing to us. Restore ye to them this day their fields, and their vineyards, and their olive yards, and their houses, and the 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine and the oil, which you are wont to exact of them. Give it back to them. My friends, I leave these biblical quotations for your consideration. But I also lend a word of encouragement to our downtrodden, oppressed farmers, and to all persons dwelling in the cities who depend upon farmers to protest vigorously today against the further confiscation of farms and against the farmers of America being used as cat's paws for the international bankers. At least we Americans can demand a moratorium on debt for the farmers. At least this nation must cease trying to extract gain from the stone which our government and its favored financial system has cast to our people instead of bread. Again, I tell you, my friends, that this entire address, with all the figures, all the tables and government facts, is prepared for you to read. Kindly write to me this week, and I will be glad to send you a copy. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Father Coughlin is taking no holidays this summer. In fact, he plans to remain on the job all year and next summer and until the close of 1940. As long as your magnanimous support continues to fund the expense of these entirely commercially paid-for broadcasts, Father Coughlin will be glad to give his time and energy to the end that Christian and American principles will prevail. You can be of tremendous assistance in this work by subscribing to Social Justice Magazine, a magazine which carries the inside story of the news, independent of any advertising, which hopes to carry on against Nazism and communism until both these evils are banished from our shores. Write today for a copy of the address to which you have just listened, and ask your neighbors and friends to study it together with the official tables which accompany it. And now, until next Sunday afternoon, this is your announcer, Franklin Mitchell, on behalf of Father Coughlin, bidding you good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've presented the regular Sunday afternoon address of Father Charles E. Coughlin from Royal Oak, Michigan. Statements made and views expressed on this program are made on the sole responsibility of the sponsor and do not reflect the views of this station, its management, or personnel. Father Coughlin's address has been a presentation on your dial at 1250 kilocycles. WHBI Hoyt Brothers Incorporated, Newark, New Jersey.